The Russians don't get a vote. Okay? You want to put troops out, that's a Ukrainian decision. That's a sovereign decision of a nation. I don't care if it's Ukraine, I don't care if it's Bermuda. The fact is, you make the decision what's going to happen. The coalition of the willing is more than willing to do that. It's sort of like an aerial ceasefire. If you have a no-fly zone, that's an independent decision made, but it has to be supported probably by the alliance. So that's a big one to do that. This thing about them setting conditions, I don't think anybody should accept that. I don't. Maybe Peskov says that, or maybe somebody else is going to say it. And it's one of those, to me, it's noise level. I appreciate, sort of like there's a comment I make among my team. Thank you for your interest in national defense. I really don't care what you said. Okay.
Okay, so that was General Keith Kellogg, Trump's ambassador to Ukraine to try and bring the war to an end at the Warsaw Security Forum today in Poland. Wow is just kind of all I can say. He's just kind of like in your face to Russia and saying, yeah, I don't care what you guys say or think about anything. We're going to do whatever we want. And just let me ask, we have our guest back today, Commodore Steve Jeremy, former UK naval officer and combat veteran himself. And just let me ask, when you hear somebody talking to a nuclear superpower and telling them, yeah, pound sand, I don't care what you think, what do you think?
Well, I think the Russians do get a vote. In fact, they got a vote going back to 1994. Furthermore, it doesn't matter what he thinks. This is all about power. And if he can explain to us how he will impose the sorts of conditions that he wants to on Russia, then I'm all ears. But we've been trying this for best part of 2.5, how long is it? 2.5 years, getting on for 3 years. And every time the Russian vote has won through. So it's fantastical thinking, but there's no understanding whatsoever of power. And I can't think of a single strategy that could be used to actually generate the circumstances that he's seeking. It's sad.
You know what? This just kind of resurrects something that I may have a little emotional PTSD against, is that we are still operating in the West across the board. Unfortunately, it's not just the United States, it's all across Europe, like it's still 1991. And we can just tell everybody to pound sand. I don't care if it's Russia, if it's China, if it's the Taliban, if it's insurgencies in Iraq. Y'all do whatever you want. We're the big guy on the block. Nobody can tell me anything to do, so I don't care. I don't know. I think you were on active duty at the time, but do you remember in the run-up to the 2003 Iraq War, Operation Iraqi Freedom, that George Bush was just rolling? He was still in all the heyday from the emotion of 9/11, and basically got everything he wanted, and everybody was supporting him. But now all of a sudden here he's going to venture into Iraq and start that war, and lots of European leaders, France and Germany in particular, were just vehemently opposed to it. And they said, this is not a good idea, whatever. And he famously, George Bush, just said, hey, you're either with me or you're against me, and this whole cowboy thing. And I'm just going to go into it. I hear that in Kellogg's voice. What do you hear?
Yeah, I think I hear the same thing. I mean, I was on active duty like you, and we were looking at what appeared to be at the time a success in Afghanistan. And my theory in this remains that the success wasn't a success. What happened was that American Special Forces on horses with overwhelming air power came into the middle of a simmering but very quiet civil war, which they didn't understand. And surprise, surprise, when they came in on the side of the Northern Alliance, they won. And so that suddenly that's over, and they start to think to themselves, we really are all powerful. Network-centric warfare is the key. This is how we're going to do it. So what's next? It's Iraq, and then they start work towards that war. I mean, I was preparing forces. I don't know what you were doing in Iraq, but we were preparing forces, and I wasn't sure whether they were going to do it or not. But we now know that war was based on a lie, the lie of 45 minutes and so on. And of course, what that took us into, on the assumption from Afghanistan that it will all be easy, well, it wasn't like that, was it? So I think what we're seeing is this sort of, it's almost astonishing to think that after 4 gusting 5 failures, that people still think that we're all powerful when we're obviously not. I think it's partly this. There are 2 issues, I think, Danny. Firstly, I think there's almost cult-like thinking. And I think because the West have been so seduced by their own narrative that they've made up, that there's almost that they demonstrate the features of a cult. And the second thing, I think, is that because of spin and the way that the narrative that's been created has been spun, many of the populations in the West actually believe a lot of what they're told, a lot of what they're fed, notwithstanding the fact that it doesn't take that long to penetrate into the analysis to find out that much of it is fantasy and some of it is downright wrong. So I think it's a mixture of cult thinking sort of mixed with political spin and an inability of anybody at the right strategic level in our governments to really penetrate through to what's actually going on the ground and what the likely outcome is.
Yeah, that's the cult-like thinking. That's such an accurate and poignant and painful way to view it, because I don't know if you mentioned the spin. I don't know if this is Kellogg trying to put some spin on it to make people think something different, or worse than that, he believes what he's saying and he actually thinks that this is the case. And you mentioned the wreckage of 5 failed wars in the past. I'm not sure what your 5 are, but one of them has to be the one we're in right here, the one we're talking about. It has been catastrophically failure from the Western side. Everything we've tried to do has been a military abysmal failure. And now he's talking like the roles are reversed, and it's actually him that's on the positive side. This on top of, and Gary's showing you this headline right here, you have Putin has ordered the highest fall conscription target in 9 years. It's 135,000 they're doing in the fall, which is the most they've ever done in the fall. And that's on top of 160,000 they had earlier this year. And Russia's moving to what they want, I think, by the end of this year, first of next. They want to have an active force of about 1.5 million men. Now, as a frame of reference, Russia started this war in February 2022 at about 900,000 total active forces. So whatever the number they've actually lost, and there's wild speculation about all these different numbers that it could be, I don't know. But the bottom line is, whatever that number is, they have recruited, and primarily recruited, enough to now then have by 50% enlarge the number they have. And of course, these troops are now experienced. They're equipped with a lot more modern equipment and their capabilities, and everything they demonstrate on the battlefield is that there is no chance that you're going to end up winning, because there is no commensurate personnel level on the other side. And yet, in that light, here's Keith Kellogg saying, I don't care what Russia says. And that's just really hard for me to understand.
Yeah, you and me both. I mean, it may be that he believes it. I suspect he does. There may be other things going on which we can't see in the White House. I doubt if there are other things going on that he's privy to it.
You're just trying to find some opportunity that maybe is not as crazy as it looks.
Well, I think what he's saying is clearly crazy. I mean, it's sad to think, but he's not the only one. It's sad to think that actually we're in a position where we've got senior former three-star officers who don't seem to understand strategy, and they don't even seem to understand operations. I mean, how did we get to that position? Anyway, I think the very interesting thing is the extent to which there is the relationship developed in Alaska has gone, or whether there's something else going on. Because I often hear people say, and they may be right, that actually the Alaska relationship has now disappeared. I wonder if there's something deeper going on. And as I think back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, there were long discussions going on behind the scenes which never became public until a lot later. And what Alaska struck me with was that this was clearly not it didn't seem to me to be a single thing which just jumped out of Trump's mind, and there was an agreement after 7 or 8 days. I suspect that there are conversations going on between the Russians and the Americans. I'd be surprised if not. And what will be interesting is quite what was said in private between the small delegations, because it was curious that Putin said, I can help you. Because, of course, what Trump's got to do is to manage his base and to manage the neocons and to manage the White House. And I can imagine a conversation where Trump and perhaps Vance said, look, yeah, this is a challenge for us at home. Everybody else wants to keep going. And we really don't want to keep going. We want to get out. So we may be saying some things that you really don't want to hear, but don't worry, we're on our way out. And I think I've said to you before, this is speculation on my behalf, but I think I've described the White House policy as zigzag. So we go left, we go right, we go left. Now, what's interesting about zigzag, it's actually a better metaphor than I realized. Because in a zigzag, when you're zigzagging, you're actually zigzagging around a base course. So you could be going north, but you'll go to the east for a bit, then the west for a bit to confuse the submarines. In a way, the question is, what's the base course? And to me, the base course is out. America is getting out. It's been clear now. They've made clear that they will not engage militarily. They will provide weapons, but they'll provide to the Europeans. The Europeans will buy them, and so that's the deal. But no American engagement. So what we know is that with America being out, we know what the outcome of the war will be. Because if we couldn't win going in with America on board, it's obvious that we won't win going out. So I wonder if part of this is one of the things that's going on. And the other thing is to offload responsibility in toto for the war to Europe and Ukraine, to Europe and Ukraine. In other words, yeah, we've done our best. We're giving the Europeans all they want. I'm sorry, they just weren't up to it. So it's all the Europeans' fault, nothing to do with us. Of course, that's not true. But again, it's not a bad line with your base. It's not a bad line with your base, which is that the Europeans. It's in Europe. It's low down on our priorities. And over to you, Europe. You want to keep going, so we've done our best to bring it to a conclusion. We can't do that. So,
well, and in fact, let's take a look at what some of the European leaders are saying. Over to Europe. Let's do that. First of all, I want to. It kind of looks like that the Europeans are coming down to this idea that almost, I don't know whether it's by default or by design, that they almost seem to be wanting to have a new Iron Curtain and a new division between the East and the West. And first of all, let me show you EU Commissioner Kubilis, who was also, I think he was also in Warsaw. He's talking about a plan for a drone wall and a physical wall to actually separate the two sides.
Now, drone wall really is, in some way, it's an idea and proposal which was discussed in this region since last year even. Here is a concept of broader so-called Eastern Flank Watch. Now it's called so. Earlier it was called Eastern Border Defense Shield, which will have two major components. One is what we can call ground wall, what is needed to be built on the ground in order not to allow enemy tanks or artillery or vehicles to come into our territories very easily. So-called anti-mobility measures like anti-tank trenches, like Dragon Tees and so on. And second is, of course, drone wall.
So he's talking about a drone wall in the air and then now a physical wall on the ground in between the two sides. Now, that was doubled down also by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who talked about Ukraine being the front line of defense for Europe.
When it comes to Ukraine, as you said, Ursula, it is our first line of defense. We are helping the Ukrainians because this is about our values, but also about, indeed, first line of defense, our collective safety. So it is crucial that they sustain in the fight, so we keep supporting them. The Americans have opened again the floodgates through the Pearl Initiative of their lethal and non-lethal weapons. I think that's extremely important, paid for by allies. But everything the European Commission is now doing through SAVE and other initiatives to bring Ukraine to the best possible place is crucial, both in the fight, but also when it comes to potential peace talks.
Okay, first of all, the floodgates have not been opened. Trump is apparently going to sell about $1 billion per month of ammunition and weapons from our arsenals and whatever else organizations we can produce them from to NATO to then give them to Europe. That's not exactly floodgates. It's more like a trickle. That's first of all. But the second thing is, I don't hear anything at all, and whether it's Kubilis or in Rutte or in indeed some of the others we're going to talk to in a minute, where there's even the possibility of actually ending the war. All I hear is, let's dig some trenches, let's make some air walls, and then let's continue funding war so that Ukraine can keep fighting. I don't hear any possibility to end. Do you?
No, I don't. I think they haven't answered the question which you very often, quite correctly, rhetorically ask, which is, and then what? And then what? So I think to me, the way I'm seeing this is that they don't seem still to understand that actually the war is lost. And I think I've always thought that the four territories plus Odessa would be the likely places that Putin would stop. I thought Novorossiya is something I've debated about as well, and the northern territories. But I think that's where I think that Russians will stop. And frankly, if they build a wall, a Cold War wall, I wouldn't think the Russians will think that's the end of the world, because they had no intention in the first place of going any further. So you want to build a wall, go and build it. You know, it's not going to make much difference. What they'll be much more worried about is any sort of any development of offensive capabilities that could be used to attack into Russia. Again, the Europeans would, I mean, can you imagine the Europeans building a capacity to attack into Russia? I mean, it's fantastical, isn't it? So if you've got with a 1.5 million army, I suspect that's will be focused on Ukraine. I suppose the question is that wall, if it were ever built, because it would need to be built, as far as Ukraine's concerned, it would need to be built after a ceasefire or a peace agreement, because otherwise anybody who starts to build it within Ukraine will be attacked by Russia. Yeah, that's absolutely clear. So your options really are to wait for the end of the war, keep building the wall to the north and south of Ukraine, and then see what happens afterwards. But
let's just look at this from the Ukrainian perspective for a second. Just imagine you got Russia rolling in. They're now going to grow up to 1.5 million man active duty force. They've already got somewhere around 600,000-700,000 inside your country now, and you're struggling just to keep the line of contact from collapsing anywhere. And then you look over at your shoulder here to your rear, and you see the Europeans who have been we got your back, and now they're building a wall on the other side of your line, so that now you've got a wall and a wall of steel on the other side, and you're in the middle of it. So I'm not sure that's a good deal for the Ukraine side.
No, but I mean, it's the sort of deal which ought to encourage you towards neutrality, I should think. Because if the Europeans aren't good, because the Europeans, as I've said, they're not going to build a wall in the middle of Ukraine during an active war. I would not unless they want to take very high casualties, and I cannot imagine the Europeans being silly enough to actually commit to those levels of casualties. So, either they build it in Poland and Hungary, or they wait until the end. So, let's see. But again, the Russians have never said that they want to do anything other than actually make themselves secure, for which they don't need any country in Europe. So, they've got time and again, I hear people saying that this is what they want to do, but there is no evidence to support it.
Well, and to the contrary, you actually have Dmitry Medvedev just a few days ago on his, I think of his Telegram and his X accounts both, addressed that issue. And he said, listen, I don't know why I keep hearing you guys talk about all this stuff about going to the West. Why would I want to? Why would Russia want to take your decrepit economies and to take over your territory, which would then just be nothing but an abscess and a sword, like what happened in Yugoslavia for the Germans during World War II, or any number of other places where they're not wanted? Why would they even want to do that? And he's, of course, his claim is that they're not going to. He says he wants the security of his country here. And he says that, and I think y'all are just a bunch of nonsense too. You're just a bunch of hot air because y'all don't want a war either with us. And then he says, but the problem is, and this is one of the more sane things that Dmitry Medvedev has said in public, as opposed to his normal wild rhetoric. This one said, but if you keep going down this path, we may both find ourselves sucked into a war that could also easily go to weapons of mass destruction, in which everyone would lose. And I thought that was a pretty sober thing for him to say.
Yeah, it is a good thing for him to say as well. And I think that's why things like Tomahawk worry me, because again, who knows whether it's how a Tomahawk is armed. I think I would like to think that as the Europeans become increasingly clear that the zigzag for the Americans is a zigzag out, and that hopefully they begin to realize that if they couldn't win with America on board, they certainly can't win without America on board. Some cooler heads will start finally to actually say some sensible things. Although, having said that, I read the Financial Times, read it this weekend. There was an article in there explaining how Russia had lost and that Ukraine was actually losing. Ukraine was winning because it hadn't lost. I mean, the article was unbelievable in terms of its, in terms of the fantasy within it. So I think what I would like to think is that at some stage we'll start to see hopefully a recognition that actually, if you want security in Europe, Russia's got to be part of that conversation.